Okay, welcome everyone to this new session of Language is a Virus. Today we are starting a new format, a kind of collaboration we thought from the beginning, but thanks to Gasal.
Cosmo.
Uh, but as I was saying, with Gasal, we are starting this new kind of collaboration. Our ideas, as Martin always says, is like to keep this place and this time like an open bar where we meet each week. And the first sessions have been created by Martin and me, first from our closest friends, then to some of you that we didn't know personally, but were part of the same group. And now Gasal told us that she wanted to invite Emma Gomis, which is our guest tonight. And also Dirk and Jessica, and some of you have told me, oh, perhaps you could invite this or that. So what we say, and this is typically Catalan, it's like when you say tu mateix or tu mateixa. Just do it yourself. So that's something I really love from Catalan. When someone asks something, they say tu mateix, tu mateix. So it's okay. So Gasal told us, and we said, well, that's great. Why don't you organize this session? You can be the host of it. And of course, if anyone wants to invite someone and also to be like in charge of the session, which like really only guiding the conversation, nothing more, please tell us, and we will be happy to do this and to expand our relationship in all this group, which is growing. We are becoming a multinational right now, and multicultural, of course. Well, so Gasal, thank you very much, and of course, Emma, we're very happy to have you here.
Yeah, welcome, Gasal, and Emma Gomis.
Okay, thanks so much. Yes, what we thought was, and what I suggested, Felipe and Martin, was for Pamenar, the small press that I'm with, to organize a series of interviews and sessions. So this one, I introduced Emma Gomis to the group, but then there'll be intervals, so other people will have different sessions, but then the Pamenar people will return later. So, well, thank you, Emma, for joining us. You've been part of Language is a Virus for some time. I just introduce you, read your bio basically, and then we can talk a little bit about your work, and we take it from there. Emma Gomis is a Catalan-American essayist, poet, editor, and translator. She is a co-founder of Manifold Press. Her texts have been published in Denver Quarterly, The Brooklyn Rail, Entropy, Asymptote, and Voice magazine, among others. And her chapbook, Canaxona, is forthcoming from Blushlit. She was selected by Patricia Spears-Jones as the Poetry Project's 2020 Brannan Poetry Prize winner. She holds an MFA in Creative Writing and Poetics from Naropa's Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics, where she was also the Anne Waldman Fellowship recipient and is currently pursuing her PhD in Criticism and Culture at the University of Cambridge. Emma's work moves between forms, disciplines, mediums, and languages, as we will hear soon of her work. But I just read this quote from Matthew Moore that wrote about her, that Emma's work steers in a place of multicultural contemplation and practical magic. I believe the practical magic part comes perhaps from her mixing the languages and can refer to the different mediums that she uses to present her work. I leave that for a little bit after and after her presentations, but I go for the multicultural contemplation in your work, Emma, because what Pamenar and Language is a Virus are having in common is, other than experimentalism, is this multiculturality of the work. And I know that you're bringing it to your work because you've been raised trilingual person, so maybe we want to start from that, from facing different cultures and bringing it to the work.
Yeah, I think that bringing in my different languages and cultures is actually a pretty recent thing in my practice, maybe the last 2 years. But I started realizing that in everything I was writing, there were kind of two different voices, even if it was all in one language. So then by kind of bringing them together, I feel like it's bringing parts of myself together so that all these different sides can kind of speak to each other. So maybe I'll just go ahead and read one of these.
Okay, do you want to give a little bit of context about the poem, or you can just read whatever?
This first one, I don't think needs very much context except for that maybe, and we'll talk about probably experimental criticism later, but I am very interested in not only the merging of different cultures and languages, but also, as you said, mediums. And my doctoral research is in kind of this intersection of creative and critical writing. And I think some of that comes through in this first poem. So I'll go ahead and read that. It's called A Kinship. Dear sister, as I write this, rectangles overlap, creating a jagged perimeter. Our floor plans converge one on top of the other like an elaborate three-dimensional topography. My kitchen extends into yours, brick melds with wood. Con esta manía de situarme, reconozco mi espacio. Casa rectangular, cama rectangular, pantallas rectangulares. I move from one to the next, sweeping around the borders. There's a place where the lines intersect, syllables are muddled and language folds over. I wake up to find my pillow cradled in the nook of a right angle. La incertidumbre se hace perpetua. Los bordes de nuestros espacios se confunden, se borran, quedan suspendidos. Around midday, I wanted to stop writing, but I had already put myself in the kitchen, my laptop glowing on the counter, repurposing the space. And there I kept thinking of a diagram Diane de Prima drew of time as a straight line with pockets that you could slip into. I am inhabiting one of her pockets. Es un hueco vacío como una cueva infinita, donde mi nombre me vuelve a llegar repetido. In the pocket, time moves at strange speeds. Sometimes I write for hours, sometimes for minutes. Both increments feel equal, approximate. From this hollow, this room, and my roomlessness, I talk to you. The rectangles split and a grid lays over my speech. Las formas en distorsión expandida, las frases se intercambian en variación, los detalles se multiplican. As a structure, a grid is inherently multiple. It repeats itself. The same figure compulsively recurs. We say the same sentences in different orders. The grid offers constraint, reiteration, which in turn allows room for freedom and variation. In The Originality of the Avant-Garde, the art critic Rosalind Krauss writes that the absolute stasis of the grid, its lack of hierarchy, of center, of inflection, emphasizes not only its anti-referential character, but more importantly, its hostility to narrative. The grid is not a totalizing system, but rather a poetics of the iterative, a queering of linear narrative. There's no singular telling, but inflections and hues that shimmer in our variation. The stories I tell you, like squares of a grid, are irreconcilable. They can't come together to form an individual telling. Vivo en ausencia, entre las cuadrículas de mi papel. In the pocket where my boundaries dissolve, the grid imposes itself, lines ripple across thicker lines, the rigidity of the grid fluctuating and warping with the light. I want everything I made before discovering the grid to disappear. In the grid, there's no original square that is then repeated, rather all squares are repetitions of each other. In the grids used in modernist visual art, the grid overlaid onto the canvas becomes a doubling of the surface, imposes a geometric order, which, as Krauss points out, doesn't reveal the surface, but rather renders it opaque. Quiero vivir en esta opacidad onírica. Quiero hablarte desde mi papel cuadriculado. So I think, yeah, as an example of what I'm trying to do with the experimental critical merging of creative and critical practices and through languages is pretty apparent there.
Do you want us to talk about it? You want to read the next one and then
go back and yeah, we could read the next one because maybe it's similar. I do have a little piece that I wrote to kind of contextualize the next poem, which is not in Spanish and English, but in Catalan and English. So I'll read that first. We were raised in the wake of an oppressive reign, in a country still wounded from years living under Francoist dictatorship. Swathed in grief from the years which saw the prohibition and persecution of political parties, the repression of the press, and the elimination of leftist organizations, the Catalan Statue of Autonomy and its associated institutions were abolished, our language and culture systematically persecuted. During Francisco Franco's dictatorship from 1935 to 75, the Catalan language was banned in public spaces and in schools. The authority released statements like "Hable el idioma del imperio," speak the language of empire. But banning a language may be an effective way of preserving it, as the speakers feel an impulse to resist the authoritarian reach into their identity. Teachers and revolutionaries held clandestine classes in Catalan. Families whispered it in the safeties of their homes. My most recent poems represent this urge I've felt to incorporate my language and culture into my writing, maybe because it still is a language, as all language is, in need of defending. It is resilient as long as we do our part to make it sing. The Catalan language is just as similar to Spanish as it is to Italian or French. My father's favorite example is that in Spanish, the glasses on top of the table is el vaso está encima de la mesa, while in Catalan, it is el got está sobre la taula. So they're very different. Our accents open and close as they do in French. Recently, the diacritic accent was lost, removed from grammar to facilitate the execution of the language. In a move to defend, we lose a mark. Now the words bear and bone are spelt the same, os and os. With the death of Franco in 1975, the 1978 Constitution recognized that other languages could be official languages of the state. Despite this, there is still a palpable hostility from the Spanish state to suppress the Catalan language. I've chosen not to translate the Catalan in my poems because it still is a language that many in Spain refuse to recognize and demand translation for, which has been you see it also happening a lot in the court and the trials that Felipe and I were talking about at the beginning of this. So with that, I will read this next poem, and it is called Xiu Xiu. We teach our grandmother how to use a virtual medium so she can show us the bird loitering on her balcony. She says, mira com xiu-xiueja la finestra, el xiu-xiueig em fa companyia. Sometimes I hear it in the shower or when I'm flipping the laundry. The soft hum quickens and falls into sync. Shoo, shoo, hum, shoo, shoo, hum, shoo, shoo, hum, shoo, shoo, hum. I start to witness the sound of the same bird. My sister doesn't call it a bird, she calls it a day. She measures time by the sound of her food cooking. Dreta a la cuina vigilant mentre el menjar fa xup xup. My text flips with the sheets. It begins with a hum followed by chup chup, shoo shoo, then hum again. In both terms, bird and day, space swells, then collapses upon itself. It forms and unforms in pliant dimensions. In its swerve, we all move into each other. The cicadas in one location echo in the opposite. The birds shoo 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 shoo, syncopating a creak 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 creak. When they all unite, the sounds go shoo shoo hum, chup chup hum, creak creak hum, etc. I archive the sounds I hear. I codify the rain, the passing car, the squeaking door. In my silence, each sound feels significant, provides structure in its disruption. El nostre ritme abarca el que és quotidià, el ritual, la paraula, la rutina, la repetició. El ritual, a gesture of reiteration. La paraula, a poetics of the reiterative. La rutina as a practice of reiterative living. La repetició, a process of reiteration. I reach a meaning making through repetition. The resurfacing creak 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 creak, the elliptical shoo 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 shoo. M'ubico i m'oriento en desxifrar els xiulets que entren per la finestra.
You can unmute if you
That was amazing. It was really great.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
A question from Sophie in the chat, if you want to answer that, that it says, would love to know more about the relationship between queerness and the grid that you mentioned.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that I could explore more and go into more, but in my thinking when I was writing this, I was thinking a lot about temporality with the Diane de Prima's pockets and kind of these events, what HD calls events out of time. But the grid as sort of disrupting linear time and through repetition or through different tellings of the same thing becoming a sort of queer time that's functioning on a different sort of axis.
Emma, I have a question.
Hi, Edwin.
Hi. About the grid, I think of Agnes Martin, and
Yes.
and in this group, in the last forever, we talk in different ways about repetition in sound and in what we're trying to get at in our meaning. And I'm really interested in how the body's capacity to repeat itself becomes another body in a way. So I wonder if you could, your approach to the grid had a really multi-layered look at what it means to have that sort of like the quadrants meeting and not meeting and so forth. I don't really have a question. I think it's more just an observation and maybe something worth discussing a little bit. I just know that repetition and mantra and sound enter into the virus of the language that that we all like here, and how you situated that in a way that was much more not necessarily analytical, just another perspective on what the grid system does to language. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that.
There's so many things to say about that. I wrote this poem as I was simultaneously writing an essay on Agnes Martin. And my mother's from Santa Fe, so as we were driving down there, I spent a lot of time sitting at the Harwood Museum, where there's this octagonal room that has all these kind of blue and white paintings of hers, but there's a skylight in the center of the room, And so the whole part about warping with the light was definitely looking at those paintings. And then there was also something that you said about the body, and I actually wanted to bring this up before starting and I totally forgot, but I was thinking today before, kind of as I was getting ready for this, that I think we're all multilingual in the sense that we all have multiple forms of expression, right? And I wanted to ask everyone to kind of jot down words as we went through this that you like to translate into different mediums or languages or modes of expression. I was also thinking about a sort of corporeal language. So how like maybe this could be a sentence, right? I don't know if I'm really answering anything or getting it anywhere, but I do think that this is all kind of forming my thinking around these poems or what went into it. And then the repetition also, I think I thought about a lot in the second poem with all the words with X's, the shiu shiu. It's a letter that appears a lot in Catalan, and I think because Catalan isn't really legible to a large public, the sonic rhythm offers another sort of access into the poem.
So the is X.
Yeah. So I'll
Because
type it
that's
in the
interesting,
chat.
like with the whole Latinx and how I've written about how that X means so much compared to Latino, Latina, Latinx, and so forth. So the X is literally a crossroads of definition, and how you capture that with animal sounds.
Yeah.
And just what you wanted us to do to write down sentences and everything, that's for the final part that we all
Yeah. Sorry,
together.
I didn't finish that thought. But yeah, that's what I was thinking, was we could all kind of come together and create this sonic, multi-layered, multidisciplinary, multilingual.
I had a question as well. Yeah, really enjoying your work very much, and in the movement between languages and what you're saying about time there, it's reminding me of something the philosopher Alva Noe wrote about time, that actually you can slow time down by moving between different languages. And I think what he was suggesting is that it's defamiliarizing. If you learn new languages, that your experience in an unfamiliar language is something that actually slows down your experience. But I wonder, if you're working with three very familiar languages, does it also do something to your experience of time? Does it change, or is that something you think can happen in the poem? Because, or are you do you feel the movement between them, or is it that they're all so familiar that you're just sort of using whichever is to hand? But
Right.
yeah, I'm asking about the time element again, I think. Really.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. I haven't really thought about it very much, but I'm thinking now that there's definitely, I mean, in the Catalan, it's a faster spoken language. We speak very quickly. So there's definitely something happening rhythmically when I switch languages, which I think I must take into consideration even subconsciously as I'm writing. But yeah, for me, writing, the actual process of writing, I think is just bringing together different parts of myself, and it feels so much more comfortable than just trying to write in one language. Maybe because I'm switching all the time when I think, or maybe, I don't know, it just gives voice to a like fuller range of myself.
Yeah. So there isn't really anything defamiliarizing about it, but that although there might be for the reader who maybe
Right.
isn't the same sort of matrix of languages,
Right.
so it might do something to time for the reader.
I think that's what, yeah, I think after writing it, I go back and look at the sort of time changing or how it would affect, although it's kind of hard to think about how someone who isn't in that same matrix would read it when it's something you understand so clearly.
Yeah, and but then yeah, what it becomes is really interesting. I mean, it's going to become different levels of sort of sound and opacity, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
for the listener, but it isn't for you, which is really. I mean, I'm stating something obvious here,
No,
but
I've
just
thought a lot
yeah,
about
yeah,
opacity as well.
yeah,
Opacity is
yeah,
definitely, yeah.
yeah.
And I think also the reception to it, sharing it with people and having people who don't understand it be very encouraging has been really helpful, because sometimes I am like, am I adding too much Catalan? Is there,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's also, I suppose, opacity as in glissant, that it's
Mhm.
you know, the making that kind of resistant space, isn't it?
Yeah.
To it is interesting. Yeah, great. Yeah, I really very much enjoyed it. But yeah, particularly thinking of those sort of the language is the sort of also the pocket of time that it can perhaps more in sound. Yeah. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
It's very interesting to know how you measure it, because it's just like, am I using too much Catalan, too much English, too much?
Yeah.
How you measure it? How you think it's like, okay, there's too much English here.
I think when I'm in an English speaking country, I tend to write it, the English outweighs. And when I've been in Barcelona writing, the Catalan starts being more present. And so, I don't know, then it's become kind of a game of like, do I want to change it? Do I want to take it out? Or do I find a different audience for it? And so some of the poems that have more Catalan, I've sent out to places that publish Catalan poetry, or so. But yeah, I'm still kind of trying to figure out that balance.
It's interesting that other than time, there's always saying space is also, the geography has an effect. If you're in a Catalan speaking,
Yeah,
you're thinking about the text differently.
You know how you thanks, Emma, that was really interesting. I hope you do some more stuff as we go on tonight. But you know how you said you didn't want to translate it for very good reasons. Have you tried, for instance, that last poem, a complete translation so the proportions are totally opposite? So there's just a little bit of English and there's mostly Catalan. And then with Ghazal, what she said, you put that into a different setting, like the opposite setting, it might almost have a similar effect. I don't know. It's just kind of weird idea.
I love that idea. I hadn't even thought about it, but I'll try it now.
I don't think it's that weird, you know. There is a poet here, Mauricio Redoles, who actually read one time a poem that every verse was in well, I mean, the first verse was in Spanish and the second verse was in English, and he kept doing that for a while. And then at the end, he said something like, this was in a public reading, of course, and he said like, okay, do you want to hear the translation of that poem? And we all said yes, and he did the opposite. So the first verse that it was in Spanish became English, and the second Spanish. And you know, that combination was really interesting and rich, particularly sound wise. You know, how you were kind of struggling to try to understand every sentence and try to complete the reading with the other part, you know. That's, I don't know, maybe it's an exercise or something that we can all do. I thought it was a really interesting piece.
There's also a practice in classical Persian poetry, especially in the ghazal format. There's a certain ghazal that is called mulamma, which means one line of it is in Persian and one line is in Arabic. And they're all in the same metric because it's a very strict classical format. And it's interesting that the Arabic is written in Persian classical metric, but the language is completely Arabic. And I remember that when I was younger, when I was reading Hafiz's Mulamma ghazals, that I was just like reading, because these two lines are written opposite each other. I was just not reading the Arabic and going through all the Persian because I couldn't understand that. But it is interesting that these two languages, which are also written with the same alphabet, were used in a same composition, one line after another.
Yeah, I think there's also so much room to experiment with, yeah, different forms and different. Yeah, I love the idea of taking the same piece though and kind of reworking it in all these different ways. Seems really interesting.
In terms
I'm
of the,
fascinated by, sorry.
go on.
Hi, Jen.
The phrase opacidad onírica, both because opacity recalls Glisson, but also because it actually inflected opacity in a different way that I felt was just made me think of it in a new way, particularly because you'd had the line about the deprima. So all of a sudden you see like opacity, you see blackness, and you see like the dark and dream. And those aren't, although I've like been really interested in opacity, and like in this translation colloquium we had last week in which there was a Quechua poet, we were thinking a lot about untranslation and so on, like this similar issues of, do you translate the work into Spanish or not? Do you let it remain opaque? But this was a different, it just brought it into a different space of reverie that I appreciated a lot. And I started thinking about if it were in Spanish, it probably wouldn't be maybe aligned with dream in quite the same way, but because it's a minor language, there's something more secret about it, more dreamlike. For me personally, I love it because I have even less, there's less opacity for me. As a speaker of Italian, I don't have to do my thing where I convert the Spanish into Italian or whatever. Like, I'm always doing a conversion process when I hear other Romance languages. I'm like, go to the Italian is the foremost in my mind, and then I have to like filter out the Italian. But here it's so much like Italian that sometimes I've actually mistaken Catalan for Italian until there was enough of it. But it's just interesting where when it's it just becomes almost like a secret that is only partially available even to like readers of Spanish, let's say, like a more dominant language. And so I kind of wanted to hear you reflect on those gradations of accessibility and how they might open up spaces for different kinds of imaginative possibilities, let's say, for the reader.
Yeah. There's so much to think about, and so much of that resonates with my practice. I think those opacity and reverie are two things that keep recurring. I'm also thinking of Catalan as in the history of Catalan, how it was when it was censored. It was a very secretive language, and people had to whisper it or teach classes underground, and but it was kept alive in this way that I think maybe we also keep things alive through dream states or through nostalgia, maybe even, but it seems very tinged with this sort of dreamlike, and I think all of my work is. But yeah, I hadn't really thought as Catalan as a language of that, but I do think in these pockets of space, which maybe the Catalan is creating a pocket for the English reader to kind of disconnect, which then becomes generative as a form of sort of reflection or thinking into a dream state. Yeah, I love that.
I mean, of course, there are always readers. You have to contend with the fact that there are readers who are like, I can't read this, you know, but I'm really interested in the folks that will sit with the discomfort of not having complete reading mastery of the literacy and will try to suss it out. So, and it's interesting that for Spanish or Italian speakers, for instance, or French or whatever, they'll have a certain amount of access, but not total. And even with the cognates, they're like opacidad onírica is not that hard to understand if you're an English speaker, if you're willing to sit with it and like think about cognates. So that kind of feeds into this gradation of access. As long as the person isn't like a jerk who's like turn the page, which I guess it's its own kind of utility to filter out those kinds of readers.
Yeah, there's also something about like illegible art as not being able to be commodified as easily, or yeah, as functioning against sort of capital, or, which I'm also really interested in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ghazal, should we move on to the next piece?
If you want to, yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so I think the next piece I'm going to share is only in English, but it's going into new mediums or trying to, I've been playing a lot with film, so these are, the next two pieces will be kind of cinepoems, and this first one is called Oniric. And it came out of some time I spent in Nebraska looking at migratory flight lines of the sandhill cranes, which is one of the largest animal migrations. And I wrote some of the poem while I was waiting in the blinds for the sun to rise and the birds to start keening. Some of the footage was also shot there that you'll see. And the rest is based on dreams and augury, which is a form of divination that was first practiced in ancient Greece, in which augurs watched the patterns of birds and interpreted their movements as harbingers.
Tu parlais d'espace, de colonne, tu sais qu'à Rétomédia, par exemple, l'espace est ouvert. Moi, je suis un petit peu feignante en ce moment, j'écris pas.
Joachim, turn your...
Par contre, c'est un espace ouvert, donc si tu as envie de publier quelque chose,
Okay.
n'hésite pas, on peut en parler là.
Joachim, you're not muted.
It's like recurrent voices.
Perfect. It's good now.
Thank you.
A coven of cranes keeps vigil over the half-sized door that leads to the woods. I double over and cross my hands. My sister wakes me at 3 a.m. to tell me about her dream, how there were strange birds nuzzling against one another, their backs coal backwards into the water. The greenery covers unassuming, so vivid and harrowing, as if the plants were to take on a life that wasn't theirs, as if they would grow teeth, extend their heads out like zip ties violently towards us. I didn't say a word. I kept close and walked softly, allowing the opacity to render a sketch, a canopy swaying in the dark. As she was telling me about it, the angel that came in her fever reappeared, then appeared to disappear. And she was made of corn, a little doll from the cornfields where she placed a coin in the bird's beak. When we reached the river, we pulled dimes from the silt. The birds dipped their beaks in the mud and coated their feathers. We culled and collected. They kettled and keened. She told me about the marvel that becomes revealed, then concealed at the span of a ripple. How the ways were haunted appear in the water. Something akin to a passing, something untamed to be wild. Her dark-haired angel, gown soaked, sleeves slapping against the water like a marvelous bird.
Thanks so much. That was fantastic. There is one question from before that I didn't add because I just didn't see it in the chat, and that's Kyle's question. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, let me, hold on, I'm just reading it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the marvelous reading. And he said, I'm wondering about your thoughts on the gesture of the shushu repetition as both queer and placed within that history of restricted Catalan, whether that act of making space within the language space was important for you as a form of radical creation or the like.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of what we've talked about is coming up again here, but I do think, yeah, the Catalan interjections are sort of queering a narrative, right, by interrupting it. And then I also just realized that shu shu is actually a whisper, right? Shu shuaja is to whisper. So there also is this sort of secretive nod towards the history of censorship, and I'm just starting to realize now that it's much more present than I even realized. Yeah.
Like shoo shoo is, you probably know this. For the people who don't know this, it's like to shoo away something as well. You know,
Yeah.
it sounds whispery, but it's also shoo.
It's also a whistle. When chouette is also, yeah. So there's a lot of different meanings to it, but there is something sort of, yeah, secretive and, yeah.
So, so back on what you showed, do you want to explain a little bit about it, or we can just go to?
I think we could just go to the next one and then maybe talk about both of them if we want, or.
Why not? Yeah.
Okay.
If anyone has any point.
This next one is a collaborative poem that was written with Murphy Chan, which you'll hear speak in Chinese and Polish, and Diane Oatley, who's speaking in Norwegian. And we had a conversation around hauntings and ghosts in relation to languages and multilingualism, and how some of them are carried with us, but are maybe not, like maybe even when they're not perceived, they're still with us, or they're haunting us through a sense of lineage that has been passed down. So the poem is called Fantasma, and I'll just play it.
Xisclava el fum per la xemeneia. El xàfec xocava contra les parets.
Gjengangere finner endelig flyt I irrganger, bortgjemte, borte, glemte drømmer eller veier, eller påfunn, suser nesten musikk.
Mira, mira,
来找
és un fantasma,
还是
és un fantasma.
梦到还是到梦里去找到了
Skyggene sveier som tilbakevendte budskap, påtagelige rytmer, historier, minner, de utspiller seg myke og motvillige, hviskende.
Escolta de prop els sorolls. Volen entrar entre plors I udols.
śniło mi się
Yeah, you can unmute your mix.
Thanks so much. So yes, let's talk about both of them. You have some point to say about them, about production of them, the idea.
I think the second one was definitely an interesting process because it was all over Zoom and there was a lot of conversation, and we did decide, we had an English translation that we also wrote together in a poem, but decided not to really keep working with that. Yeah, and it was interesting to try to also see how the rhythms of the different languages and how we would kind of organize them in different ways. But I've been very interested in collaboration also recently as kind of a form of staying connected during these times. So it was really heartening in that sense and felt grounding.
That's excellent. And also, there will be more reading. You will read more poems as well, right? Later? Okay.
Yes.
Because I received some private notes that people want to hear you more.
Hola, Emma. Emma, I just wanted to ask you, because I know we're talking about like the familiarity of languages and stuff, but actually I felt like it was a lot of familiarity, like in a real way, like you talk about your grandmother and the bird and then your sister, and then it's all this like a real, like a very female family presence. And then I thought even with the ghost, it was like this kind of familiarity or like very closeness that is not only like the relation to the language, or maybe it is, but like I just thought it was really beautiful that closeness with your really familiar things.
Yeah, something I'm going to share a bit later on from I'm working on a book of essays that are all written to my sister, and I think almost everything I write is either addressed to or they make an appearance in some way, but mostly it's addressed to them, which I think growing up in two places and being so far away from your family, it's like a form of the epistolary address offers a sort of reaching out to them. And the ghost one, I think I was absolutely thinking about, I was picturing our farmhouse in Catalunya in the Montenegro, but yeah, and how we kind of used to play with sheets and pretending to be ghosts. So there's some kind of like childhood innocence in it too, I think.
Yeah, but I think all the familiarity makes it very strong as well, like the closeness of images and feelings, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, there's a wonderful like contrast in the second one. Like the image, there's just basically two images in it, and and one's this kind of delicate thing. I wasn't even thinking ghostal. I was just thinking that, you know, a breeze, or, you know, the white linen and all its associations. And then this other thing, which is the speaker piece of technology. It's an amazing kind of contrast, which at the blurred bit was so powerful too, because it was like, is that a face? And then it comes out of that, and you think it's almost like using, in a queered way, the image of you know, that artists use, like Picasso, in terms of primitivism, of a African mask or something, and yet it's this speaker. I just thought it was really effective, and I didn't mind that I didn't understand anything.
Thank you. Yeah, there is something about the sonic power of hearing languages you don't understand also. Should I move on to the next piece?
Go, yes, to the next piece, because it is a longer piece, right?
Well, first I was going to share a little bit of the Pamenar piece actually with Anne.
Okay.
Just a minute of that, and then I can cut the next one down too. We don't have to do the whole thing.
Have to hear it all.
Okay, so this next piece I'm going to just show you a little bit of is a chapbook that Ghazal is going to be publishing on Pamenar, and it is a collaborative poem written with, sorry, I can't find it, that I wrote with Anne Waldman. And we wrote it during the first lockdown, and we were talking a lot about our dreams. And so there's a whole epistolary preface where we're sort of exchanging these thoughts about dreams. And at the time, I was having a lot of dreams where I was seeing words in Catalan. And she was kind of responding and saying that she had also throughout her life seen different words. So we used those as kind of a starting point for this poem that became a very long poem. And the reason why I want to show it to you is because I think we played quite a bit with the form of translation and decided to switch off. My parts were written in Catalan and hers were in English, and then each line has a corresponding footnote with the translation. So it requires quite an active reading in some ways, and I think it can be very disorienting, which also speaks to the active translation of multilingualism, of the ways we can interact with different languages. And I have a recording of us reading some of the poem, and we decided to read it we were reading simultaneously, but she's reading her part and I'm reading my part. So it's not the literal translation, but rather the sort of dialogue that we were engaged with over these 2 months.
El que busquem dins del son és un lloc on poder cobrir-nos en llenguatge.
What drives the nations of the world is
Habitar un espai
alienation
on
from
les paraules
linguistic being,
s'eixamplen com una
the
manta,
uprooting of all peoples from their vital
una
dwelling
llengua
place
dolça
in language,
contra separació aliena,
to filch
un
in
plat
respect to plot,
de tragèdia,
tragedy,
Antígona amordassada,
and flutter under scrutiny,
un pànic prismàtic,
prisma,
poc a
that
poc
was the
se'ns
word
endinsa,
reached, as to see through,
col·lapsat.
cried out in sleep,
Veiem les seves espeses
a world
qualitats
blighted,
a través d'un
collapsed
desglaç.
to conspiracy,
Poc a poc la paraula es
etiology,
desfà,
to flinch,
sense
to
donar-nos
flutter.
treva. La
He no
teologia agita,
hyacinth, he a loser
un puny,
with candor,
un pla,
a force of
la
nature
paraula
far
es
flung.
desfà, amb força onírica de recolzada paraula trobada en somni.
I'll stop it there, but just to give you a sense of how we were sort of thinking in the process behind it. I don't know who's
Fantastic. Thank you. Amazing.
We're also working on a film. This text actually became part of a script for a film that we're making with her husband, Ed Bowes. So it's fun to kind of see all the different forms that this text has taken on.
And as a person who's going to publish it, I'm going to say that the book, the chapbook's going to be out, and the film is going to be on the Pamenar website, so they'll be released at the same time, both the film and the chapbook.
Which I was actually reading the other day. I know HD was in a film, and she wrote a chapbook that went along with the film that was then released under an anonymous name, but just thought that was kind of a fun fact.
Absolutely. So are we going to your next?
What can I just ask what the film is of the text, or just the audio of you guys reading? What do you mean by film?
The film is, so Ed Bowes is an experimental filmmaker. He teaches at SVA, the School of Visual Arts in New York. And he's worked with a lot of poets over the years. And so the film, I think, it's really about this time spent during the first lockdown and these kind of hypnagogic states that we were communicating through, or we were like writing each other emails at 4 a.m. and working together and kind of using our dreams and our creative outlets to, as a way of like finding some kind of grounding or hope or distraction or something. So I think it's about that creative relationship, and we had no actors really, so it's mostly Anne and I reading our pieces. Towards the end, we were able to shoot with a few other people when things opened a bit more, but we're still editing it and kind of putting it together, but mostly it's like a poetic film of different texts.
Thanks, very good. So are we going to?
Yes, I mean, we can also just skip that one if people are getting tired. I know we've been going for a while.
We can vote, but I don't think no,
Okay.
People are saying that.
I'll do just a shorter version. Let me see where I can cut it.
Emma, just read it.
The whole thing?
Yes.
Okay. So I have some images that go with this one as well. And this is a kind of collage I put together last night and this morning of different sections of this book of essays that I'm working on. And they're very much about family and addressed to my sister. There's, in all of them, it kind of veers into art criticism, but I've taken most of that out. So these are hopefully the funner parts of it. Oops, that's the wrong thing. Okay. I'm reading a book by Silvia Federici and come across an Italian illustration circa 1385 of a woman walking out of an overgrown garden, balancing a tray of spinach on her head. Sister, the wind blows through the leaves in visceral bloom. The black and white of the image pulses. The caption on medicinal medieval gardens reads, "A l'edat mitjana era normal que les dones tinguessin un hort on cultivaven plantes medicinals. El coneixement de les propietats de les herbes és un dels secrets que transmetien les dones d'una generació a l'altra." I'm reading in Catalan. Something wakes up inside of me, yawns, stretches out like dust in a sunbeam. I reread the sentence, this time translating it as I go. In the Middle Ages, it was normal for women to have a garden in which to cultivate medicinal plants. The knowledge of the properties of the herbs is one of the secrets women transmitted from one generation to the next. We've always been told our maternal grandmother was an herbalist. Versions of the story of her death have been passed around, reassembled, and reclaimed in variants. No one agrees, the details are vague. We know that she died after misidentifying and ingesting poisonous hemlock. I wonder how you would be had you met her, how your figure would contour in rhythm with hers. The poisoning of a body can take on different designs, some acting rapidly, others a slower, insidious destruction wearing it down gradually over time. Dear A, in your last note, you put the noun sister before my name, as if I were a nun in a monastery or fighting in a revolution. I write to you as if you are me, as if we are the same. Maybe it is you or it is me. It is you that falls and scrapes your knee and I that bears the scar. It is me who falls into the pond where the turtle bit your hand. You are my alternate versions, like foils we map onto each other. You are loud while I am quiet. You are joyful when I am sullen. We rebel against categorization, and rebel and revel have the same roots. So in the spirit and impulse to do both, let's throw a party. Emma. But you're not in the mood to party. You've been sick. You say that when one doesn't feel well, they should always wear more makeup. When I ask why, you respond, I think of makeup as a kind of protective barrier. It keeps all the bad shit from coming in. We lean our phones against the wall and you give me a makeup tutorial over FaceTime. The screen is the wall we tapped on when our bedrooms were adjacent, and I have caught your pain, so in response we adorn our bodies. Searching through a drawer, I find a Polaroid of you, sister, crouching in the garden of the house we grew up in. Your friend looks at the camera while your body leans towards the dirt. Is this one of our inherited gestures? My most vivid aesthetic memories are of playing with black beetles at our farmhouse in the Monnegra, the Black Mountain of Catalunya. Catching them in buckets, watching them disappear through cracks in the wall, under rocks, how they would move so slowly across the ground or over our hands as we brought them up to our eyes to inspect them closely. The funny sour smell when we found one dead in the toilet or mashed into the terracotta floor by a careless footstep. On that black mountain, I wrote down the details of our games. We wrote anti-monarchic plays and put them on in the fields behind the farmhouse. The cops spoke in Spanish, the civilians in Catalan. Our uncle has, over the course of his life, amassed a collection of plastic bags, which he keeps in a shed. He opens a box, ripping the duct tape from the seams, then pulls the bags out carefully, one by one, as if examining an archive of capitalism. In the stacks of the library, we search for and pass around editions of books like sacred objects, opening the covers and analyzing the colophons as if they contain some kind of secret code. The emblems, little imprints we photocopied and traded like stamps. Sometimes things appear like strange synchronicities. Things I've been thinking about materialize and meet me in the most unassuming of places. In this way, I've started noticing plaster casts of different parts of your body throughout my house. I find your ear, teeth, lips, hand, expect a limb to protrude each time I open a drawer. You used to build prosthetic limbs, form molds of your body to practice a making of wounds. As we aged, you left pieces of yourself scattered around. Made throughout your life, they were not part of a cohesive project, but just something that you did. You gave them to people as gifts, mostly to me, and carrying pieces of you with me each time I moved to a new place They have adorned every room I have lived in. Your bottom teeth I keep in a drawer by my bedside table. You were 16 when the record was made. Now your teeth have eroded. Ground to stumps in your sleep, you've encased them in gold. You've covered the chips with shine, coated over the decay. You love the way grills look, but decide instead to get diamonds and jewels glued onto your canines. Your fascination with cosmetic adjustments continually evolving, the cast capturing moments of a body in constant transformation, serving as a technology of memory. Recording fragments of time, each cast recalls your body in a specific temporality, serving as a tangible object, a memory aid, a record, a ghost. The casts become altered reproductions of the current manifestation, shifting between negative and positive. You enact a process of documentation, creating a corporeal archive. I've become the custodian of the archive. I've created a catalog of your casts. My process of becoming involved a new relationship to order, a ritualization. Your cast hand fraternized with my hush. It silently remains severed from your body and from time, becoming a pocket into the past. Despite the different modalities of transport and many journeys it's been on, it hasn't decomposed but remains intact, a relic. Your artifact hand is fragile, but I transport it tenderly, supporting it with wads of tissue so it stands up in a shoebox, so it doesn't bounce in the back of my truck and end up a pile of shards, half a finger, a piece of wrist. Your natural hands are more resilient. They speak in loud gestures. They move with the rhythm of your improvisations, ringing with worry. Your nails nod down to the flesh. Laden with rings of gold and onyx, they move to punctuate your flow of thought. As I watch them choreograph your thinking, I consider a theory of punctuation based on the interrupting gestures of your body, an improvised movement with its own idiosyncratic motions and commas, a pre-Socratic rhythm punctuating your conversational flow. Your ear sat on my coffee table, eternalized. Sometimes I would pick it up by the lobe and move it to another stack of books where it rang patiently. It folds and curves upon itself, encouraging a making of words. A covert organ of balance, the canal here is blocked by cement. Your left ear, usually ornamented with gold hoops of different sizes, punctured along the rim, lays bare and gray. When you came to visit, we talked about reproducing it along with other cast appendages, placing and arranging them in the woods to create an optical illusion, a graveyard of body parts decomposing into the earth, hidden by leaves grown over with lichen and moss. The only photo I've ever seen of our great-great-great-grandfather's cells is the same one that populates his Wikipedia page. In the photo, he sits with legs on either side of a backward-facing chair, his arms crossed over the top, obscuring the upper rung. His gaze set directly on the camera, his eyes are kind, the black beret tilted to the side and wrinkles lining his face provide the true aura of a European intellectual of the early 1900s. In his left hand, he seems to be holding a piece of paper or a handkerchief. It's impossible to tell if the object is a note to a friend, a scrap of paper where he scribbled down an anecdote, or an old cloth rag to blow his nose. In the early 4th dynasty, there first appeared in the hands of statues what the American Egyptologist Henry Fisher, the former curator and head of Egyptology at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, refers to as an elusive shape. In their fisted hands, many of the figures sculpted during this period seem to be holding a mysterious oval object. Along with other art historians, Fisher argues that the only object in the repertory of Old Kingdom iconography that corresponds to the more usual form of the elusive shape, both in contour and color, is a bolt of cloth. He goes on to point out that the hieroglyph that represented a handkerchief is also similar to that of a bolt of cloth, and that both could be potential solutions for the mystery of the elusive shape. Fisher writes that if cloth has by its very nature an elusive shape, assuming among other shapes the one that is found in the hands of Egyptian statues, it also lends itself to a variety of uses. Thus, it is not surprising to find a piece of cloth occasionally in the hands of women, children, or prisoners who would not ordinarily be expected to hold a staff or a baton. The piece of cloth here becomes an object accessible to all. Regardless of class or gender, it could be found in your hand, in the photograph hand of Sells, or an Egyptian king. Cloth is a neutral material used in making garments, upholstery, bed linen. It is also used to obscure things from view, to cover the hands of a magician as he performs a trick. It was also the fabric found in our hands as we flung a sheet over the string we had tied between two trees. In this way, we suspended the backdrop for our plays, useful in case we needed one of us to stand behind it with a hose spraying upward in a scene where it was raining. As a child, a sheet is infinitely mutable, easily becoming a ghost, a backdrop, a parachute. Sometimes we would use the sheet to make an elephant, with one person bent forward, hinging from the hips and placing their hands on the waist of another in front of them. We would hang the cloth over the two bodies. The person in front would stick out one arm and sway from side to side to act as a trunk. Then a third person, the elephant trainer, would lead the elephant onto the stage and ask for a volunteer from the audience. The volunteer would lie on the floor and the elephant would slowly and hesitantly step over the volunteer's lower back. But as soon as the first person stepped over, the second, the elephant's rear, would pour a glass of water onto the volunteer lying unsuspecting on the floor. The trainer, dismayed, would help the wet volunteer up, apologizing profusely for his elephant having peed on them. Draped in cloth and elusive shapes, trading colophones on the Black Mountain, we wrote our manifesto. The censors found it, and here is what remains.
You can unmute your mix. Please unmute your mix to feel your heat.
Yes, let's unmute and clap again. All of us. Thank you. Fantastic. Do you have anything to explain about it or talk about it, or you want us to reflect on it and ask questions?
I mean, this was kind of a collage from a bunch of different essays, so I'm not sure if it totally flowed together, felt too. But yeah, I don't know what else to say except for that it's very much about family, and everything that we've talked about today I felt like kept recurring, from the cloth to, I don't know, just all these different themes I'm starting to realize thanks to all you that are kind of coming up in all of my work.
But then the form of the whole piece is going to be much longer, right? It's just you read parts of it for us.
Yeah, it's in 5 different sections and it's about 120 pages right now. And it's
okay.
I think it really worked. I think it was good that it had different elements. It's like different languages, you know. And also, I mean, in terms of going back to this whole thing of what you call the creative and the critical, that seemed to be quite prevalent here. It wasn't just about the family. It was, you're talking about things in sort of different ways, or those two elements are sort of the creative and critical are the family's the subject, but the creative and critical in a sense are really mixing and interweaving in interesting ways.
Thank you. That's great to hear, because that's definitely, yeah, what I've been exploring through this.
And that, I believe, is the idea behind the symposium that you're also, you want to talk about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, maybe I'll just.
About manifolds and about the experimental criticism symposium.
Yeah, please tell us a little more about it.
So I've just started a new journal called Manifold, and Edwin is going to be speaking on one of our panels, who's here. But I wanted to share this. This is the cover of our first issue, which features these concrete poems by Rosemary Waldrop. And the idea of this journal is kind of to establish a space outside of academia, which is not about producing and publishing in academic peer-reviewed journals, but something that can open up a space where we can play and experiment with this kind of intersection of creative and critical discourses and start to see what that kind of interaction or meshing can generate. So to celebrate this launch, which this journal ended up being very long and a lot of pages, and we have a lot of contributors and wanted to hear all of them speak on this subject. So we've organized this symposium around experimental criticism, which is going to run over the course of the next 7 weeks. And this was the one last week. There is a link to the recording of it. And then
could you please, I can put it perhaps on the link. But if you have it open, could you just put a link of it to the chat so we can.
I'll do it in a second. I can't.
Okay, no rush. Just that it's in there so people can click on.
And we've partnered with all these different presses, and then the symposium is going to end with a forum on with all these different presses to talk about different ways of publishing and disseminating this type of work.
I have a question about it because as I'm also part of the academy, it's the kind of stuff I'm always thinking about. And I just knew about this project last week, and I was very interested from the beginning. I also wanted to ask you if, well, I have 2 questions. I don't know too much about like experimental criticism or experimental academical essays, or kind of, I usually teach a class about, it's like a workshop for graduate students. Sometimes I call it non-academic writing, and it's related to some things that Charles Bernstein, for example, have been working on. And we usually teach like different ways of making critique, writing essays, but also to think about the models, the politics about academical writer in which we live. You are studying a PhD, so you know perfectly well what I'm talking about. So I wanted to know also first if do you find like a tradition of this kind of experimental criticism? I don't know. For example, I always think of Ezra Pound's essays as a very free way to explore poetry and saying things with humor or irony, kind of tones that are usually not included in academic writing. But that's the first question. And the second question, if besides your practice about it, what have you talked about the politics of academic publishing? And I'm thinking especially money, paying for your works to be published in an academic journal, or paying to access an academic article which was funded with a public funding, for example. I mean, that's a question that lots of us here in Chile are arguing about. It has to do also with the points that every journal has and the quotations and how does it impact in your academical career, all that. It's something really boring, I know, but it's very important to talk about it, because I imagine that it's very difficult to publish an experimental essay in one of those more classical journals.
Yeah. To address the first question about kind of a history definition of this, my dissertation is also on this topic, and my supervisor has been asking me, you have to establish the field, you have to your first chapter should be a genealogy. And I spent quite a few months trying to come up with a sort of genealogy, and I realized that kind of goes against the entire idea of what I'm trying to do. So I think that experimental criticism is functioning.
Sorry, I used to talk like a supervisor. Sorry.
No. I mean, it's a valid thing to say, and I really, but I'm trying to think of it now more as, because it is still important to think of who has done this before and where is it coming from. But I'm trying to think of it more as like a rhizome or a constellation rather than a chronological canon. And in that, I've been looking at a lot of Gertrude Stein's lectures. And then just a few people that I think are working in this mode, among them Lisa Robertson, Fred Moten, kind of more contemporary examples. But going back also, I mean, Joan Retallack's work, I think Rosemary Waldrop, who is featured on the cover for that reason. Rachel Blau Duplessis. I mean, there's a lot of people that have worked in this way. And then also, I think going back to deconstruction, right, and the developments that kind of the form of the essay took on. But the second question about academic funding and structures and publishing, it's, I mean, the professionalization of academics is just so frustrating and such a problem that I think this is definitely trying to create a space to work outside of that. I also think that all these kind of obstacles and impositions placed on critical writing is a real hindrance, and it's limiting the critical thinking that we could be doing, whereby kind of having these creative moments, we can be more generative or have footholds that offer a different type of thinking. So it seems like something that's really necessary to me right now. I don't know how to deal with the academic professionalization except for trying to do like a part in having a community or helping publish those pieces.
Yeah, I know, because I mean, every time I meet an academic from other country, I usually talk about this kind of stuff, and we're always complaining about the same. So it's not so different. There's one book I really like that might be interesting to you, by Louis Burry, I don't know. It's called Exercises in Criticism, the Theory and Practice of Literary Constraint. Maybe you know it, but it's a book about Oulipo, and every essay is written using a constraint about an Oulipian constraint. It's very interesting. It's like self-reflective. But yeah, I mean, besides the examples you mentioned, there are not too much. I remember an essay about appropriation. I guess it was by Jonathan Safran Foer, maybe, or
Mm.
I don't remember in this, but it was an essay about appropriation written with appropriation of different texts. So it was also self-reflexive. Or, well, and in Spanish, guys like Severo Sarduy, for example, he's like a neo-Baroque poet, and he has beautiful essays that are kind of collage, different quotes and styles, and well, there are, but there's also the problem with the institutions, of course. So
Yeah.
that's part of the deal. Well, but thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to know more about this journal, and try to
We
follow.
actually have Cristina Rivera Garza has a piece in the journal called Appropriation for Beginners. So
she's very good, and well, she's great in a lot of senses.
I think she's actually is going to be speaking this next week.
Oh, great! I'll be
on this Friday.
Perfect.
So I just, if there is another point, we take it, but then because it's already 10:36 here, perhaps 11:36 in Europe, we go to the jam part. But then if the discussion continues, we continue with it, but maybe having a shorter time for the collaboration, jamming together.
I've got another question.
Please.
Well, I'd like to know. I mean, you've explained this through example, but I still would, maybe it'd be interesting if you said, what do you think experimental criticism is, or what's your favorite kind of it, or sort of thing. I mean, and one of the reasons I say this is, to a certain extent, to just really broaden it out ridiculously, a good poem is a piece of experimental criticism. I mean, a good poem or a good piece of art talks about the world, is interrogating the world, yet it's doing it in a kind of cliched understanding of this, a non-rational way, an imaginative way. Yeah. So, I mean, George Steiner, I think, said poetry is the most rigorous form of thought. I mean, it's an arrogant statement, but I kind of like it. And so how do you narrow that down to what you're saying is experimental criticism?
Yeah, that is a great question, and something I've been trying to figure out. I think that the journal has been a sort of survey of how people are thinking about it, which has been really interesting to see these sort of different approaches. And some are definitely more on the poetic side, and some are more on the like traditional academic side. For me, I think a piece of experimental criticism would have to have an object of critique. And then I think that I'm thinking of it more from the critical side and adding the creative into it, because I think, you know, we talk about how poetry can access this different type of languaging, or like it's not a sort of rational prescriptive way of thinking, but something, it's just a different type of communication. And I think by introducing that into a critical piece, it can offer us these kind of spaces to step back from the information or the more prescriptive way of writing to think imaginatively or go outward. And I think that interaction could be really fruitful.
Yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me, you know, like, I mean, the dryness of academic language and all that kind of thing. And, you know, I was in Berkeley for a while, some years ago, and I was quite close to the anthro department there because of my partner who was in it. And some of the academics in there, like Iwa Ong and some really interesting people, basically thought of themselves as doing creative writing.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Yeah, so like Avery Gordon, I don't know if you know her, but her work is definitely in that vein. I think a lot of sociology, anthropology is also going into that. But yeah, I think it's very interdisciplinary, right? And that's another amazingly like fertile ground we could cultivate further.
Great, thanks.
So do we have any points, comments? Should we go to the last part? Will you please lead it? We needed to have some words, right?
Yeah, so my thinking was just that.
Oh, sorry, Felipe.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever you like.
No, you go.
We can start with a silence.
Okay.
There are some children around, no?
So Emma, we read our words.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking if you had some words that you had thought about translating in different ways, or how you could translate them, how they've kind of carried with you through different expressions or modes of expressions, and then to just read those or act those or say those.
So we can dance them, we can sing them, we can.
Yeah.
For me, it would be shoo shoo.
Yeah.
You know, I lost a little that part of the conversation because I had to attend another meeting at the same time at the university. But I don't know if you talk, there's a musical group called Shoo Shoo.
Really? I had no idea.
Very good. I mean, it's just one guy, but let's see. Yeah. From San Jose, California.
And Emma, what I liked was also the gestures that you made when you were just reading, you know, the laundry machine, the shoes, the sounds.
I think that's also from spending a lot of time with Anne, who's very performative, and I've started thinking more about how we can, have our gestures kind of work with our poems.
But also because you're talking about in some of those poems about childhood and the experience of a child, and then some of the gestures were very kind of innocent, childlike movements that they fit very perfectly. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you. So I think, yeah, if we want to start just saying our words and feeling out, we can
Internet,
all at the same time.
internet, in body, outernet, out body.
Reverie.
Shoo shoo.
Somni.
Shoo. Slipping. Shoo.
Tumia, tumia.
Shoes.
Futuro.
Chauve-souris.
Shoo. Shoo.
Fantasma.
Your shoe.
Formalina.
Sueño.
Fantasma.
Where is my shoe?
Nebraska.
Qui si rivolse.
Rapiña.
Wiggling.
In shoe, out shoe.
Here she revolted.
Chispa.
Chista. Chista. Circus matters.
Amatista.
Whispering what you were dreaming of.
Silenzio.
Rivolgersi al personale.
Opacity.
Chaleco de mono.
Revolt at the personnel.
Chupacabra.
Labra, labra, palabra.
Personnel. Ella.
Paralelepípedo.
Like
Nose.
nest.
Nose.
Para palabra.
Ritenne il passo.
Ciclopentano peligro fenantreno.
Escalopendra.
Pareco extra.
Rivolgersi al personale.
Beer, beer. Beer, beer.
Labicollection.
At the personal.
Creu. Aliwen. Mawun. Iwe. Shoo shoo. Away away. Away away. Shoo away. Shoes and shoes. Muchina.
Wawa.
Chachara.
Achoo.
Champurria.
Chi si rivolse, ritenne il passo. Perché? She revolted and held her passes.
Hand.
Soya sausages.
Seashells.
Saliva.
The shore.
Solvent.
Salad.
Solitude.
Sold it.
Salt.
Sale. Sa di sale.
Sácate uno.
Lo shushu sa di sale.
Bueno.
Realización.
Liberación.
Salvación. Sol.
Externo.
Sol. Sol. 333 calorías. Solvente.
He shells the sea. She hells the he.
Solvente.
El.
Invented.
Shell smells.
Poubelle.
Absorbente.
C'est moi dans la poubelle.
Al solvente.
C'est moi.
Invention de la vienta.
In the year 2525.
Invienta.
Ezra.
El viente. El vientre.
Oloviente.
El diente.
Miau.
Oliente.
Diente.
Riente.
Ventus.
شنیدم
Where's that other nut?
5 دو
Where's
5 9 5 3 5 3 2 1
5-9 sweet and 9
شنیدم.
crowley.
شنیدم
Un no sé qué queda balbuciendo.
No sé qué di.
Boing, boing.
5 9 3 4 3 7
Próxima estación.
Montana.
Guitar.
Próxima estación.
Chichisa zapka.
Barbera.
Chichisa zapka.
Próxima estación.
I'm in Proxima Station 4.
Al personale.
Buenas tardes. La hora exacta. 7:54. La temperatura
شنیدم سبز
26
شنیدم
Possible.
grados. Gracias por llamar.
La hora de levantarse. La hora de cambiar.
He shells.
La hora de...
Chile con su vacuna.
Amb destinació.
La hora
Romani.
de la temperatura.
Zolish.
C'est moi dans la poubelle. He hell.
Edwiner.
as.
Próxima parada.
شنیدم دوباره شنیدم 9 3 4 5 9 7 5
Freedom
8
is a
9
light,
12
la cual muchos hombres have died in darkness. La libertad como discurso. Freedom as a commodity.
Shoo shoo. Where are you, shoo shoo?
Faces, fold, drapes شنیدم دوباره
Me parete.
Rectal.
La mia camera.
Yes.
Vero conosciute in un'altra lingua la sera.
Intensity.
Ovu
shapes shapes
Intensity.
The initiate imitates the bear in dress and action. The great bear cries, ooh, 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 man. The people will fall in fright as if thrown from a tilted plane.
شنیدم
Of mascots, there are very many whose skin and nubuck are wear on the forehead. The common forms are the heads of animals, birds, fish, hoops, head, bands, head.
Schengen Agreement.
ماهی
E translation.
Coconut.
Coleoptera.
Los culpables. La llama en la tumba.
Sneaky
Mató a las sospechas. La cual muchos hombres.
Is critical.
Collaboration. Me quita el sueño hoy en día. Estaba intentando y todavía no encuentro. ¿Qué diablos es la gente? Un símbolo de patriotismo. Una ética de la estética revolucionaria. Reglas en las casas de los más nobles. Jesús bajo esas bancas. Y la metralla fue la enfermedad del soldado desconocido. Libertad como mercancía. El asunto es sencillo.
دوباره شنیدم
In collaboration, out collaboration.
شنیدم دوباره شنیدم
Internal.
Born from water.
Hex.
Je vois des sons et des poissons. Je vois des sons et des poissons.
C'est el sonido del
El sonido.
bourdonnement es como cuando la abeja zumba. It's the continuous tone that is everywhere since the beginning. En español di zumbido. A ver.
I was a fish, you were a fish. I was a collaboration, you were a collaboration.
Sortir le disque après toutes les galères. Là, il est beau, il est chouette, j'ai que des super retours, ça va. Bravo. Et puis c'est très drôle parce que pour moi c'est comme de la poésie. Hein. C'est vraiment travailler symboliquement sur le symbole. C'est absolument en raccord avec la poésie. Si je faisais un truc de poésie, je mettrais le caducé, ce serait pareil. Je dirais...
was the plan to repeat a word? To repeat a word?
I'm
To repeat a
suspecting
word? Was the plan
carpenters of Emily.
to repeat a word? Was the plan to repeat a word? What was the plan?
You symbol, get out of that jello tree.
شنیدم لمازا، دوباره شنیدم دوباره شنیدم. 9-7.
Je rêve que j'étais en train de prendre soin de... Fuera acá, que la voy a liberar, ¿sí? Por culpa de ella, ganaron todo. Yo iba saliendo acá ayer, claro. Estaba todo el día llenando, fíjate. Bueno, así que, digamos, toda esa parte hasta llegar después a Puente Alto, donde vivo ya 20 y tantos años.
I think we're in a pocket of time.
Los amigos o sea, en la novela, los amigos se van, digamos, pero lo que el punto de partida que ya tiene la novela es que la novela del golpe no se ha escrito, y es verdad. Entonces, por ejemplo, siempre se hablaba antes, la novela del golpe nunca apareció. Entonces, los tipos, por ejemplo, ya como
Emily.
Germán Marín u otros, pues ellos son los más. Entonces yo ahí les dije, voy a escribir esta novela, pero voy a hacer la novela de la novela del golpe, ¿entendéis? O sea, como yo le digo a un amigo, vamos a escribir la novela del golpe y vamos a buscar los materiales. Y él, entonces, la novela de la búsqueda de los materiales, la novela del golpe. Mire, yo decía
I got
esto,
some
por
really
ejemplo,
good time in my pocket.
mira,
Who wants some?
yo me pregunto esto, el pueblo,
Ci
las
troviamo
personas
nella
explotadas,
tasca
las personas que
del
ganan
tempo di
entre
una lingua
150
che
y
non
300 lucas.
Aprovecho.
conosciamo, che non
Esiste, que vende su
ancora,
trabajo
No.
y lo que le pagan es
che
una
è
basura,
da
Videos.
esistere.
digamos, como el sistema es una estructuración nueva, digamos, de lo económico. Entonces, los explotados siempre están, la miseria siempre
Ciao.
está, pero las cosas que hicieron estos huevones fue haber
Ciao.
convertido esto en una sociedad de
Una
consumo.
parola
Entonces
veneta,
tiraron los malls, tiraron
veneziana,
los malls,
lo
fueron dueños de la
sai?
televisión, de todo. Entonces, a través de la televisión, ellos van engrupiendo, engatusando la
Significa
televisión tan bien hecha
io
como
sono il tuo
técnicamente, bien hecha como la
schiavo.
hacen, ¿ya? Entonces, mucha gente
Io sono la
sin
stessa cosa.
formación, aunque estén explotados, estén
Aquí
cagados, por
mucha
ejemplo, dicen
gente.
cosas así como que
Yes, everyone goes.
hay que endeudarse.
We can stay here and continue, but just once more, I want to thank Emma for her fantastic suggestion.
Thank you all.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very much,
you.
Emma and Gasal, for both
Merci, Emma.
session.
Grazie.
Brilliant.
Oh, by the way, next week we'll receive Pia Sommer, but we'll meet a couple of hours early because she has a little child, so we have to put up with that hour. So I hope it's not too early for you guys. So, we'll meet, I think, 1 or 2 hours before the usual.
Okay.
And hope to see you again very soon.
Yeah, that was lovely.
Yeah,
Tomorrow
thanks,
night,
Ghazal.
tomorrow night is full moon.
Thank you, Ghazal, for
Yeah,
organizing those Pamenar combination, and on every one of you, if you want to
Sure. Thank
invite
you.
some
Really
friends.
enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Everyone.
See you
Ghazal.
guys next week.
Lots of
Thank
love
you,
to
Emma.
everyone.
Thank you for your
All the best.
combination of language
Thank
and
you.
Bye.
Great
Ciao.
to see
singular in
everyone.
the
Bye bye.
universal.
Bye bye.
Ciao.
Take care.
Bye,
Take care.
ciao.
Stay safe and
Are
be
you,
well.
Joaquin? You're in Tokyo.
What?
You're in Tokyo, Joaquin. Where are you? Tokyo, Kyoto.
Springtime in Tokyo.
Sorry, guys, before you go, tomorrow night is full moon and we are going to have a drink in the present. So it's not, we don't even have a Zoom account. So we're going to have a Jitsi meeting where, I don't know, we can just have a drink in the present. So I'm going to send it to the group just if anybody wants to have a drink and a sound.
Yes, thank you.
At what time?
That was lovely. Mm.
I don't
In
know,
the
like
night?
yeah, similar time to this, I suppose, because it's our night, like at 9.
Yeah,
Perfect.
good.
We
Yeah,
can just
because
have
there's
a
something at
drink
7
in
I
the
want to listen
present.
to.
And a bit of a dance, maybe?
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
a bit of a dance.
Yeah.
Not gonna be anything formal, just a bit of a
All
sound.
done.
We can all join in the present.
Okay. You're making a pocket of time, man.
I know.
Yeah.
It's nice, whatever.
Okay.
Tomorrow is full moon then.
Oui, oui, c'est...
That's good news.
Comme tu dis full moon?
La pleine lune.
Ah, la pleine lune. C'est ça.
And
À
I love
demain,
it.
pour la pleine lune, nous faisons un drink pour le présent.
Voilà. Nous allons chanter à poil sous la lune.
Exactement. Ça, c'est fantastique.
Écoutons la messe du temps présent d'Olivier Messiaen.
Et il est déjà jeudi. Il est minuit 7. Allez. Ouais.
Allez.
Ouais.
Allez, Bouzon.
À demain, tout nude. Nous fait la pleine lune.
Ciao, ciao.
Go prancing in the trees behind you. Go prancing in the trees.
Ça, c'est très joli, ouais, avec toutes les
Make your
stars.
microphone.
Ça, c'est fantastique. Beaucoup d'arbres.
Beaucoup d'arbres. J'attends la nuit.
Ça,
Et
c'est
j'enlève le
que
bas.
nous besoin de ça.
Merci Emma.
De rien.
Merci, Joaquin.
À bientôt.
À bientôt. À bientôt.
Ciao.
À demain.
Vous voulez rester, on va rester à l'afterworld là. Non?
Ah, on reste à l'after.
Flowers, yeah.
Ouais. L'after.
Dude, it's so terrible because we just finished our wine.
I have more you want, like Chilean.
Send me some telepathic.
Yeah.
Les
Chilean
vins
wine is
télépathiques.
cheaper in Republic Czech than in Chile. It's good one.
Wow.
Chilean wine. So hay una good Tarapacá, Cabernet Sauvignon.
J'ai une
Like
bouteille.
in Chile, it starts like 15 euros, and here like 4 euros.
No.
Hey, you're not far from Georgia there. You should get some Georgian wine. That stuff is fucking amazing.
But where are you guys in Prague?
Yes.